Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Gary Sankary. I am Esri's Retail Industry Manager, and this session is GIS and Retail, the New Normal. Today, we're going to be discussing the profound impact of COVID-19 on business, and specifically in the retail industry. Retail as an industry has been experiencing disruption for a long time. If you've been to any trade shows and we talk about the retail apocalypse, which was nonsense, by the way, but as we talk about all the digital transformation that's been going on in our business, all of this has been happening for years. But then with the arrival of COVID, all of a sudden it really has happened at a dizzying speed now, as what once was things we were trying out, like curbside pickup and buy on and home delivery, are now the only channels of operation for many retailers who are around. So with all of this impact on how we engage with our customers and how we think about facilities of the store, I have with me today three leaders from really iconic brands in the retail industry who have really led efforts at their companies to react and respond to the challenges that COVID has posed on their businesses. First of all, I have with me, I'd like to introduce Jason Jackson. Jason is the Chief Security Officer at Bass Pro Shops, and he has extensive experience in emergency management, business continuity efforts, and security operations at Bass Pro Shop and at Walmart before, so across Tier 1 retail. And he also has a background in law enforcement and emergency management. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you.
Also with us is Ralph Torres. So Ralph leads Ulta's data and geography systems. Ralph has 20 years experience leading GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, professionals both in the retail and in the insurance business. And prior to that, he spent a lot of years in the U.S. Army working in cartography and leading mapping departments within that organization. Welcome, Ralph.
Thanks. Great to see you.
And then also we have with us Steve Sapardanis from Carhartt. And Steve has been leading Carhartt's efforts to use location intelligence to support Carhartt's field sales team, which is a little different from the retailers. So it's going to be really interesting to get a perspective from an organization who also has, they have stores, but they have their field teams, and they're trying to support retailers as they continue their business. Welcome, Steve. We're glad to have you today.
Thanks.
So when we kicked off 2020, I'm pretty sure no one thought we'd be having a session like this. And there's Black Swan events, and then there's this. So this pandemic really has been, I can't use enough superlatives because they've all been used. But when you think back, and when the impact and the scope of this pandemic came into focus, which, in my opinion, felt like it was literally overnight. All of a sudden, we had this situation where wide swaths of stores were either closing or they were being forced to operate under significantly restrictive limitations. We learned new terms like essential and non-essential retail and what could be around. And all this time, we're trying to figure out what that definition meant. And even more complicated, depending on what state, what county, and what city you were in, those definitions were different. So from a retailer with a national perspective, this is really trying to navigate a lot of very local, very precise information. And, at the end of the day, this was a really chaotic time for all of us. So if you can sort of go back to that a little bit, Jason, if you don't mind starting, I'll pose the question. As the severity of this crisis started to emerge, can you maybe give us a little insight into what were your immediate priorities for that?
Sure, and I think you kind of hit it perfectly right at the top, which is I don't think anyone expected 2020 to shape up quite the way that it has. If we were betting people, we all probably would have lost. But as we go back to January, February, honestly, just from a risk intelligence standpoint, we pay attention to what's happening around the globe anyway, from an environmental standpoint, to ensure that our operations are running safely. But the number one focus for us always is life safety, making sure that our outfitters, which are our employees, are safe, and whether they're doing business in our retail operations or manufacturing or hospitality here in North America, or they're providing services for us which were our early concern overseas in doing factory inspections or sourcing operations. That I think was the biggest key for us, is that life safety component. And in those early days started restricting on our own some of their movements, closing down travel into certain countries before even the Department of State, closed those things down. But right behind that, just from a priority standpoint, as things were emerging rapidly, I think two key things for us. One was locating good sources of information. And we, like probably everybody else, leverage the World Health Organization. Here in the U.S., we leverage the CDC, or in Canada, we leverage the Public Health Agency of Canada. But you're looking for rapidly updating information. So that was a huge concern and challenge that we were trying to work through. And the other, I think, would be the understanding how we needed to adapt in the business. We knew from the outset that we were going to have to adapt, but like most everybody that's probably even listening, we just didn't know back then what to fully expect. We had plans, we started down those plans, but pretty quickly we're making changes. So life safety, finding good sources of information, and adaptability and how we'd overcome were those top three things we were looking at.
So Jason, just a quick follow-up. Your stakeholders and your leadership team, what kind of data and information were they looking for at the onset?
Well, I think more than anything is just understanding a complex, unknown situation. And so if you go again back to January, February, for us, it was still happening somewhere else. And understanding what does that mean to supply chain? What does that mean to our folks that are located outside of the United States? But as we started moving forward, it became more around understanding that complex picture of what was happening jurisdictionally at that, you hit it earlier, that local, state, federal, provincial, national level, and how do you even consume all of that data at one time?
And this is, if maps ever had their day, this seems like it would be the time for that.
Well, and I mean, you're 1,000% right here. And I think back to that, taking in a complex situation that is happening everywhere, and the ability to see it at a macro level, but then also drill down into specific jurisdictions. I think one of the key things, and we shared this with our pandemic coordination team right out of the gate, is really were two key things. One, people's behavior, including governmental behavior, will be driven a lot out of unknown and fear and emotion. And the other is everybody is on a different point in the timeline geographically. And so things that are happening, as they emerged in Washington State and New York State, were not necessarily what was happening in Missouri or Kansas or other locations. And so everyone's at a different point in the timeline. And so how do you take all of that that's happening differently, dynamically everywhere, and put it into a simple to understand dashboard or map so people can just consume that information on a regular basis?
Ralph, let me ask you, in a similar question, in your situation, you've got thousands of stores across the United States. What was going back to as reports were coming in on what was happening, how were you able to gather that information? What was your leadership most concerned about very early on?
The biggest thing there was just getting into the data. Things were coming in from all over the place, and just really finding a trusted data source or a common data source that everybody was going to use. So we really had to find right away. What I was tasked with was finding where we were going to get our data from. We were going to meetings back then in a conference room, and everybody had a data source, and everybody was looking at different things. We needed to really agree on which source we were going to use, and also bring in things just to check and balance the information we were bringing in, but just to collect it all together. We had the benefit of having our enterprise server set up at the time, and it was really a system of reference that people were going to for a lot of store information. So it just made sense to include my group into there and to really bring everything in, especially as time went on and we started to work remotely. and we weren't able to get together, we were able to bring all that data in and just have one source of reference for the data. And we did, we were looking at the Johns Hopkins data, because everybody's using Johns Hopkins, CDC or state and local, governments, all the different things. And the really good thing now, and moving through and creating the process was, all these teams that were hitting different things. Our legal team was looking at state regulations, our operations team was looking at personnel. And as they were doing all that, they would send all the information to my team, and we would just gather it and publish it onto the enterprise server. So you can go out there and geographically look at it and see all the information across the board, for anything from, like Jason has said, from micro to macro all the way down, from the national level down to your individual store.
Thank you. And Steve, I'm really interested because your issue is a little different. You have a field team who is servicing retailers. So the actual store data, you don't really, if the store decides to close, unless they're telling you, you have to sort of deduce that. And yet you were able to overcome some of those hurdles and create a dashboard and some maps as well. Am I correct?
Right. So yeah, not only was it just the field data for the accounts, but it was also finding out where did our sales reps actually live, and we were plotting that on the map. I kind of felt like I was at the NORAD, desk control panel, and everyone wants to pull up the map and let's see where everyone's living and let's see where the accounts are. And to your point, we then. It's just like the whole Esri slogan, right? See what others can't see, right? But that's what we were able to now reveal is, where do the reps live? Where are the accounts? And what's happening at the accounts, right? And it was very much like the 9/11 period when they were grounding all the planes, right? And all, when you look at the big air traffic controller keyboard, the screen and all the lights are shutting off type thing. We were seeing that to some extent when businesses were starting to close their doors, and we were able to see that almost in a real-time data, and that really helped us clear up some of the conflicting information that we've got. Are these stores open? Are these stores closed? Who's essential? Who's not essential? And the mapping tool was really able to provide that to us.
So interesting. This is great, and I think because we've been talking forever about GIS and how you can bring disparate data sources into one platform and then interrogate it based on the location. And if ever there was more disparate data than health data and government regulations and all the other stuff, that really makes that concept come alive. I would ask you this, Steve, just kind of a little bit of a follow-up. Your team is mobile, and they're out in the field supporting their different retail customers. Are you able to also use this data? As we're starting to recover, are they starting to think about they're going to need to go call on some of their accounts and they got to do some traveling? How are you able to support that exercise?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what we're doing. In fact, just this week, I rolled out access to the mapping tool to those managers as they started to have those conversations with their sales reps to have them understand, all right, here's where you live, here's where your accounts are, but then also here's the county level data of the state of the virus, the status of the virus. Sure. Is it trending epidemic or is it trending controlled? And then that will help the reps and the managers determine a strategy and itinerary around who are you going to see first, second, third, this week, next week. And that's data that they've never had before. So that was just really, really critical in helping us basically make that decision for the reps to make that call, whether to go out and visit the accounts, and then for our crisis management team to kind of make the decision for us to allow the reps in general to travel.
And Gary, hey, do you mind if I just jump into something that Steve said, because I think it's fantastic, is he hit the word trend. And I think as we've been going through this last several weeks, it's really been the trend element that has been most important. So we can talk about static numbers or daily numbers or whatever it is, but having an understanding of the trend line and which way it's going is really what's driving behaviors. And even in leveraging, we have kind of three different groupings of data that we use to make decisions from. One is governmental information, so what the government tells us is should be happening or shouldn't, restrictions and so on and so forth. The second is external information, so community level trend data. on what's happening, infection rates, hospitalization rates,
Yeah.
but the trend behind them, followed by internal data that has the same. So I think that I just wanted to call out that really important thing that Steve just said, which is the trend piece of it, and how cities, counties, states are actually using a lot of Esri product to showcase that on their websites and provide that analysis so that we can consume it as the private sector and use it for our actions.
Yeah, and let me, because I know we have a lot of retail folks who are going to be watching this, just to be completely crystal clear, when we talk about trend here, that's a loaded word in retail, but we are talking about the trend of the virus and the trend of what's happening. Okay, very good. I knew that, but I was also thinking trend. Yeah, we need to know trends. We all know trends. Okay, so let me pivot a little bit now and talk a little bit about some of the discussions that are going on in the industry. I kind of alluded to it a little bit in the beginning, in that, retailers have had to pivot with light speed to new fulfillment models, new selling channels. I mean, right now, if I'm a retailer, I'm very concerned about my market share and how do I maintain a relationship with my customer when they can't come visit my what is probably my most important channel, which is my brick and mortar. So, Ralph, I know prior to COVID, Ulta was recognized for a lot of the work that they had done in the area of omni-channel unified commerce and how they, some of the engagement strategies you had with your customers, a lot of really cool stuff going on. After COVID, I'm sure you've seen some pretty dramatic changes in how, especially if they can't go to a store, and how they're going to support curbside and how we're going to support if they're going to have changes to our e-commerce business. Can you talk a little bit about the role that location intelligence has to help stand up some of those capabilities or extend some of those various practices?
Sure. Yeah, those are a number of really big things that, like you said, we're growing prior to, but during everything going on, it has grown quite a bit. The ordering online, the curbside, pickups and things of that nature, home delivery. Those are all things that were in the works and they were going. But during this, you just put a whole another layer of complexity into it. And really how they used a lot of our data that we were collecting was, there's so many different layers behind that. Just saying we're going to do a BOPUS or buy online, pick up at the store or whatever. That's one thing, but you have to use all the different layers that we've provided in the background for the internal departments. Do we have the staff to do that? Is the staff comfortable in doing that? We have to survey the staff and collecting. And then once we have that, do we have enough staff to do that? And also looking at the other, the areas, just the geographic areas. What's the state out there? We don't want people coming up that are, driving up that are sick. If the trend there is really high. So there was so many different layers, just to make those things happen. And again, the company being able to go to this one place, one source of reference to really look at all these different layers and different analysis was just great. We were adding things to our dashboards, daily, weekly, as everything changes, because every day something was changing. Sure. So it was just a great place, for them to look at, all this information in the background.
Steve, I'd ask you, as you guys have your own e-commerce site, but you're also supporting products and logistics for your customers' e-commerce site where they're also selling Carhartt products. Have you seen any changes or where the geospatial and GIS has been able to help to facilitate and stand up some of those newly expanded services?
Well, we have 33 retail locations in addition to our website as well. But yes, the Carhartt.com e-commerce business has picked up tremendously, obviously, as that shift in consumer behavior has happened. Pick up, as well as appointment shopping in some of our locations, to kind of make that adjustment to kind of just understand what the current climate is. But it's been a challenge for us. But then we've also shifted some of our production in our manufacturing plants to make PPE product to serve the frontline and consumers, and that's something that we haven't done before. So being able to do that at different levels has really been challenging, but really sort of reassuring to see that we could make that pivot.
And I think, one of the things, Ralph, you alluded to this, that the trade areas or the catchment areas of your stores, we have seen, shopper behavior changed overnight, where now trips are being consolidated, and in order to avoid contact, people, they still want to get out to stores. And I know, Jason, I would like nothing better at this point than to walk through a Bass Pro Shop and look at the aquariums and look at the animals and just kind of go back to, but did you guys do any work, or have you thought about how those trade areas might be changing, and how that is going to impact who your profile customer might be?
Yeah, and I think that one of the challenges, that you said it in the beginning, is that understanding jurisdictionally. So our customer is our customer, and we have a pretty good idea who they are. But at the same time, we're definitely seeing a lot of new folks coming through our doors at this point. Maybe because of what you just said. When I came to Bass Pro and we were having the conversations, I think made the comment that I didn't really consider Bass Pro to be much of a retailer as much as it was an experience. And I think hopefully that's what landed me the job, right? But at the same time, it's a true statement. When my kids go to Bass Pro, their eyes light up and they get excited. And my 4-year-old calls it daddy's fishing work. And so, as we do deal with that, the jurisdiction by jurisdiction, again, back to that local, state, federal, specifically local, state, cities and counties, tribal lands, as well as, parishes and so on and so forth. That really drove a lot of the behaviors. And I think as we saw the wind down, and then even the wind back up of retail being closed and then back open, that drove more of the behavior as far as us having to usher people through a little bit faster,
Sure.
Restricting access, people not lingering as much. But honestly, at the end of the day, I think people probably like a lot of shopping experiences right now, as they're coming back into the retail environment, are just happy to be pushing a shopping cart. And even though we have the concerns of social distancing and whatnot, that freedom of being able to go through and pull something off the shelf or look at your favorite item, or in our case, go look at the fish, is a little bit of a mental and emotional reprieve too, that brings us back some of that return to normalcy. So yes, most definitely, we're seeing it, but I think a lot of our actions are being driven by some of those governmental requirements for us right now, that we just went through and are continuing to go through.
Well, no question, local data is absolutely critical. And, we've been talking about, the way the virus is impacting communities. It's very volatile. We think we have it under control. And as we're seeing in some places that we were wrong, and it's making a pretty vehement comeback. So that's going to change governmental regulations. It's going to, we may see some stay-at-home orders back on. So let me pose this for Ralph. In terms of the changing environment, and I know you guys, recently you thought you were well on the way to a reopening, and then you had, when we had some of the demonstrations for some of your stores in some markets, you had a little bit of a hiccup. What that tells me is that there's a real need for as real time as possible data, and I'm thinking about the dashboards, and I'm thinking about some of these feeds. How are your leader, first of all, how did you gather that particular data? What did you find to be the most useful? And then how did you share that in your organization, and how did your leaders make use of that?
The really good thing was that, like I mentioned before, we had a lot of the different teams that we're working with, legal and operations, merchandising, growth development, all the different teams, they all have people out in the field. We have people in here at the corporate. So everyone had brought to the table all that data. And as they brought it in, we were able to feed it right in as live as it could be, bring it in. And, it started with, the pandemic, and then, in the protest, we even had some weather issues, that happens too, we had some really bad storms that affected, some of our stores. So it was just as everything came through, we would just collect all that information. A lot of the good things are, like Jason had mentioned, that Esri has a number of layers out there that you're able to use that are really great, that update automatically. So, we use those as much as we can, and then accent them with our data, and we have all of our field staff out there, at all of our stores that are also, inputting information utilizing some different tools, through Esri. We were using the survey 123 before. Now we changed it over and started using it in some different ways, and just ways that we could send all that in, collect it at once, and then publish it at the different meetings.
So were you, we haven't talked about gathering, about some of the survey 123. Jason, have you found that, have you guys used that as well to sort of gather real-time enterprise data at your store level?
No, and actually we actually use Survey 123 for something a little bit different that I have to appreciate my Esri team for jumping on what I call a crazy adventure to build a occupancy counter via Survey 123 over the course of a weekend that we released out to some stores that had a critical need for it, and then of course those restrictions kind of come and go and lift, but at the same time we had a great experience in working with the team to roll something out rapidly, which is the great thing about open architecture. You can take kind of a pseudo self-appointed data hound like myself that knows just enough to be dangerous, like you mentioned earlier, and get me in with an engineer, and we can go do some really cool things. And so, yeah, that's how we used it during the course of COVID.
So with the idea of real-time data, and as you're kind of gathering it, one thing just to unpack a little bit, and maybe we'll start with Steve. You were able to bring forward to your management team, some of the maps and analysis to show where, stores were going out. How is that received, and were they able to was it able to inform decisions and make some of the strategic calls that they needed to make in time of crisis?
Right, yeah. So the mapping tool is fairly new to us here, but it's quickly becoming a game changer. It's now a strategic tool that's really being asked for by the senior leadership team. Because I think historically people have always thought that data was just sort of, or empirical data was binary information. But now with this tool, I'm basically making them aware that geospatial data is just as important. And I think that's a new sort of dynamic for us, even though we are a 130-year-old company. I think they've really recognized that seeing things in that capacity on that level is much more revealing than just sort of tabular data. And so to that respect, we actually built a time series animation that could show us what was happening in the field at sort of at the beginning of when the virus hit until sort of, current day type thing. And that sort of trend that we can show them, here are the data points, whatever level you wanted to look at, whether it was our locations, whether it was our retail locations, but whether it was our consumers, our accounts, we were able to show them, again, geospatially what was going on. And that was just a wow moment for the company.
Very cool. Ralph, how about, as you were sharing your information, your leadership also using this data to make strategic decisions?
Definitely they were. We had the enterprise portal that we had was full in swing prior to this, but everything that's happened this year has been a silver lining, call it, for us. It's just exploded. And, not only bringing in the dashboards to senior leadership and senior staff meetings, for them to click through and look at and visualize all this information versus just a report or, spreadsheet, has just leaps and bounds, jumped, the availability or the reception of the data. And so now, we're busier than ever, even with all this going on, because everyone wants to integrate their data in there and use it as a system of reference. So it's just been, just a crazy time, not only with things that are happening, but a crazy time because of all the information that people want to show.
So, all right, so let me switch gears again just a little bit. So we know that this pandemic isn't going anywhere anytime soon. We know it's going to be with us at least for the near future. And until there's a vaccine or a treatment that's reliable, that businesses will be operating at a very significant completely different environment than we had prior to COVID-19. So let me start then with Jason. As you sort of think through the next year or two and future, what do you see as some of the changes that are going to be the new operating model, if you will, and are going to stay with us?
Sure. I think, even as we saw, just, learning from the recent past, the one thing I love about retail is, retail is all about entrepreneurship, and retailers will always find a way to adapt to their current environment. I think the adaptations that, we've gone through most recently, along with the things that were already in play, like Omni, buy online, ship from store, curbside, and all these have taken a massive leap forward just because of almost like forced consumer behavior, and just due to the pandemic. I think a lot of that is going to stick, and so we're going to see continued growth, and this is across the retail board, continued growth of omnichannel as a main source, and consumer shopping in a little bit different way. I don't think it knocks out brick and mortar retail at all, and especially for organizations like mine, where it's an experience as well as just a shopping trip. And so I think that what we really also anticipate is changes to the physical space are going to remain for quite a while, and whether that's mandated or it's just demanded as we listen to consumers talk to us and communicate back with us, and take that to heart and ensure that we have the proper things in place to make them feel safe while they shop. I think you'll see the physical changes to our structures that were probably meant to be temporary will stay around a little bit longer. Post that, as we go out, a year or two, I think that a lot of those things will start to be designed into our facilities as a regular, and even when we get to, hopefully soon, to a place where the pandemic isn't a topic of conversation anymore. I think that some of these, again, physical and digital changes that have occurred are just going to stick around for quite a while.
I don't disagree, Ralph. I would ask the same question from Ulta. Like I said earlier, you guys are already sort of leaders in this space, but this has really put it on, really accelerated a lot of the adoption. What do you think for the next few years? Is this going to stick around? Do you see what changes do you see in how Ulta's operations might be impacted for the long term?
I definitely see, like Jason was talking about, the different things that have been, brought in, the temporary, things just helping keeping everybody safe. I think they're going to be around for a while, and, they are going to be built in, to, our establishment moving forward, but I think that it really is going to be a catalyst for a lot of these programs that we had going already, and, you see a lot of the Omni, picking up. You see a lot of, all these different places taking place of that lack of, people walking into the store. So it's definitely, it's going to balance out, and it's going to, help us, jump in new directions, as a store. Ulta Beauty, maybe not as much for me, but it is an experience for women when they come in there, similar to like when I go into Bass Pro, it's an experience for me,
Yes.
So it's we still have, as soon as we start opening the doors, we saw, a lot of our members moving, and that's something that we're tracking just as stores start opening again, tracking the different data that shows, the movement of not only our customers, just the population in general, to see where they're going. So it's, it's going to be something that we're going to have to just watch and see how everything unfolds.
Okay, well, one last topic of discussion I'd like to think about. So now that the shock and awe, if you will, of the virus and the pandemic has sort of, I don't want to say it's gone away, but at least it's been reduced a little bit, or it's now we're all trying to figure out what's new. If you could look back to March when this was first getting started, what would be the most important thing that you would have liked to know now, that you would like to know then that you know now, and how is that going to help you going forward? And I think, Steve, I haven't picked on you in a while, so let me start with and especially from a wholesale perspective as well, which might be a little bit different.
Well, we would have liked to have known, obviously we would want to know the future, and we would have, to your point, have wanted to know, is this just a temporary thing, or is this going to be here forever? We quickly kind of realized this is kind of the new norm. And to that point, the data was so critical because it basically sifted through the conflicting information that was out there. So now to be able to leverage the empirical data, the county level data, the virus level data, and then layer on top of that our accounts, our reps, our stores, that's just now changed the way we do business. But luckily for us, we were able to quickly react to that and have everything in place to do that. And I think without the mapping tool, it would have been a real struggle. I don't want to say it would have been a panic, but it would have been a real struggle to kind of say, hey, listen, we have all the data here, and here's what it is. So when you can lay it out on a map and physically show them geospatially what's going on, I think it just sort of eliminates any sort of, I almost want to call it like a bias to kind of say, well, this person wants it sort of as a self-serving type of deal. No, it's just sort of, it is what it is. It's the data, it's official data, and it's our data, and it's government data. And that was really reassuring for us to know that we could leverage all that, layer all that, and put that all together and package it up in a very easy to digest format.
Thank you. Ralph, looking back.
Yeah, looking back, I think, I mean, Steve kind of mentioned it, knowing how fast this was going to ramp up, when it all first started coming and we were watching other places, that this was happening, and, nobody believed that it would happen this quickly, when we were looking at things, we were looking at closing stores, and it was going to be a long, drawn-out process, and next thing you know, all the stores were closed, so it was very quick that this happened. We were also, able to react quickly, and get a lot of things, moving to aid in the analysis. But I think if we'd have just had that insight on how quickly things were going to change, and that was not going to be the end of it either. There was going to be other things.
Well, I was going to ask you. So, do you believe that? I mean, especially from the from the location intelligence perspective, that this has enabled you to react faster from when you see inputs from the field, or when things are happening, so that now I can see exactly what's happening where faster than we ever have before.
Yeah, oh, definitely, and that's been echoed across our organization, that just being able to see, the information so much faster and in a different way has just been great for for us here at Ulta. And
Jason, so you get to close us out today.
Sure, and I think, definitely echo what Steve and Ralph said. Having the data sources, being able to understand at a jurisdictional level, and I think that was the big surprise more than anything for us, is how disparate the data was and the information and the requirements at every different level of government and across the the different geographies. And so how to better one, source and bring in the information, but then also input it and contextualize it and all of that. But honestly, the big takeaway for me, if I could do it over again, and thankfully for the next time we'll already be here, is the maturity of the organization and the managers, whether it's the field level back here at the office, to actually know how to use these dashboards, consume them, demand them, and add to them, as opposed to just being sometimes an observer of the information that's coming in, but rather a challenger in saying, hey, can you add this, and can you add that, like Ralph had mentioned earlier, I think is huge. And so as we go forward into, for this, if it's wave 2 or wave 3 or whatever the next major crisis is, I think that our organization, and probably a lot out there, will be better positioned because you went through this internal evolution of leveraging geospatial information as a game changer.
Well, I think that that's all we have for today. Gentlemen, on behalf of Esri, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a life, myself, 30 years in the retail business. I honestly haven't seen anything like that, but I'm just inspired by how, especially on the GIS side. I mean, there's a time when if you rise to it, and you guys have certainly done that. So I'm sure your organizations and customers appreciate that too. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you hopefully virtually at the UC.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it.
Thanks.